Okay, greetings and welcome to the Galley's Pan-African Community News Update. Today's date is the 19th of October, 2025. I am Brother Dr. Toyin Agbetu. I think you know that by now, but this week I'm joined in the studio with the wonderful, hopefully she's there, yes, Sister Oleander. Okay, now we're going to give you a review of some of the community-related news from over the last fortnight. As ever, you're welcome to interact with us if you're watching live using the chat system. We should be on, I think it's Facebook and Twitter and YouTube or whatever, all those different platforms. But whatever it is, you're welcome to subscribe, like, and share it if you think this contains information that will be helpful to others on Liberation Road. We have a really packed program today. It's always packed, but this week particularly so. So I'm going to try and move through as quickly as I can with as much stories. But we're going to start as ever with libations to those that have recently passed and to notable anniversaries. Just as a heads up as well, if you are watching live, it's always helpful for us just to know that you're out there, that you can hear us okay, that you can see the stream okay, that, you know, if there's any technical issues, just to let us know. Sister Oleander is manning the fort right now, so that'll be pretty cool. And it's always appreciated. But I'm going to assume everything's okay and move on with the first libation. And that's going to go to our elder, Yvonne Brewster, who joined the ancestors aged 87. She was the founder and director of the Talawa Theatre Company. I've been there for many plays that have kind of like helped me through my lifetime and really expanded my cultural and historical awareness of the challenges we've been through. She was a towering figure in theatre and television. She spent much of her life expanding opportunities for artists. She reshaped many of the narratives that were presented on stage of people of African heritage. She was involved in mentoring several generations of performers across the Caribbean and the UK. For those of you who know, or who don't know her background, I should say, she was born in Kingston, Jamaica, 1938, and her love of theatre was kind of triggered from the age of 16 when she saw a play. She saw an actor on the play, I think it was Mona Chin, and she thought, she looks just like me. Wow, that's fantastic. I want to be like her. And that's what triggered it. That's what started her journey into the world of theatre. She did some amazing work, as many of you will be familiar with. She moved in 1956 to the UK to study drama at Rose Bruland's College, becoming the institution's first Black female drama student. I don't use the term Black, I don't know why I said that, but African heritage female drama student. And on the first day, she was told that she was unlikely to find work, yet she persevered, and the rest is history. So we remember Yvonne Brewster, who joined the ancestors aged 87. The next libation is to another stalwart in our community, and this is to Rosalind Howells. Now, known to many as just simply Ros. That title really belies the magnificent contribution she made to our community. She was director of the Greenwich Racial Equality Council in 1994 and became a life peer, earning the title of Baroness in 1999. Now, she was educated in London and United States, where she became the first woman of African heritage on the GLC's training board, that's in the UK, and the first female member of the Court of Governors of the University of Greenwich. The best way to describe her is that she offered a life of service to projects helping the community. She worked with the Carnival Liaison Committee and the General London Action in Race Equality organisation. She was campaigning for justice in the field of race relations. So she did a lot of race equality work. That's really what she's known for. Not just doing the work, but also supporting, mentoring other generations. She was also a trustee of the Stephen Lawrence Charitable Trust and at the forefront of the fight against what was, you might have remembered, we've spoken about this in the past, the labelling of children of African heritage as educationally subnormal in the 1970s. She took on the fight against racism in the financial sector and then finally within the House of Lords itself. Now, there is a wonderful tribute available on YouTube. You can type in Black History Walk Salute to Baroness Ros Howlers or Howells, sorry. There's some great contributions of people sharing their experience, what they've learned from her, and just kind of reflecting on what she gave to our community. So we remember Ros Howells. Now, the next libation is to, many people know him, his stage name, the soul singer D'Angelo, who recently joined the ancestors at the age of 51 after being diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Now, that came as quite a shock to many of us this week. In a statement, his family wrote that, they gave his full name, Michael Eugene Archer, that he had left behind a legacy of extraordinary moving music and asked fans to celebrate the gift of song that he has left for the world. Now, D'Angelo was a very influential singer. He was known for pioneering versions of R&B. Some people talk about neo soul. If you remember Brown Sugar, you think about what was that other song? How Does It Feel? He came onto the scene with an explosion and a rawness and an honesty and a clarity, fusing hip hop and jazz and so in a way that had been done for a long time. What some people don't know is that he also wrote the lyrics for "You Will Know," which was actually produced for the film Jason's Lyric. It was part of the soundtrack and performed by a collective called Black Men United. Now, this was a collaboration of the industry's most famous male R&B voices in 1994. I mean, I could go through it as what they call R&B royalty: Boyz II Men, Gerald Levert, Keith Sweat, Tevin Campbell, Stokely from Mint Condition. I mean, there were just so many of them, and they came together. And I think they donated the funds to, what was it? There's a funding, there was a Rwanda fund, because that's when the genocide was taking place, and to some of the colleges that dealt with African American education at the time. He did, it's an amazing accomplishment. People don't know that he was behind this. You can actually watch a short video of him with Bobby Seale. You might know him as one of the founders of the Black Panthers, where he talks about his commitment to take action against racial injustice. And it's important. It's a very short clip. It's only maybe like 20, 30 seconds long. But, his words invoke some of the comments of Marvin Gaye talking about the responsibility of the artist. So you can check it out. He didn't speak so much politics in the music that he's famous for, other than You Will Know. But behind the scenes, on the streets, he was doing this work and encouraging others. The only other thing I would actually add to this as well, which is quite tragic, is that, if we think about the implications of his loss at such a long life, at such an early stage of his life, 51, he's like still a pup. His children have now lost both their parents, because you may remember we poured libation for the songstress Angie Stone, who was the mother of his children. And so they both passed away in a relatively short space of time. So we really send our condolences and our thoughts and prayers to the family who, and the children who've lost both parents. It's a horrific tragedy for them to experience. D'Angelo, we remember. Okay, the next libation is for an outstanding sportsman, a great exponent of what they call swing bowling, and his name is Bernard Dennis Julian. Now, he joined the ancestors at the age of 75. He's recognized as a fine cricketer and one of the greatest Trinidad and Tobago all-rounders in the sport. Now, those were just some of the terms used to describe him. He was also the 1975 Cricket World Cup winner. And like I said, he recently joined the ancestors. His sporting prowess is unparalleled. The only thing that perhaps mars part of his career was when he participated in a tour to South Africa during a period when the world of sport was sharply divided by the moral and political challenges of apartheid. And he was criticized quite strongly for playing when he shouldn't have, to be honest with you. It doesn't stop the fact that we pour libation for our ancestors, and it doesn't change the fact of his sportsmanship. But there is that moral question, which really taints what was a magnificent record. Either way, we remember. The next libation is for an activist who, I just found out today that he joined the ancestors. And this is Elder Expo Nani Kofi. He was an amazing activist. He passed away in his hometown, Peki, in Ghana on the 3rd of September this year. He led and dedicated his life. It was a selfless life to activism. It's not even enough words to say. He was about putting theory into practice. He didn't believe in just intellectualism for intellectualism's sake. So he was very practical. He strongly believed in the idea of the movement needing everybody, and that everyone with our different skills had a role working together to move towards liberation. Now, like I said, it was quite a shock to find out that he'd passed away. There's going to be a live stream of his funeral taking place on the 1st of November. There is a 3-hour video on YouTube called "The Celebration of the Life and Legacy of Explo Nani Kofi." And, I don't even think 3 hours is long enough to explain his contribution to the struggle. I met him on many occasions. We laughed, we joked, we argued. We had all those kind of different contradictions that you have in activist circles. But one thing that was never in doubt was his dedication and commitment to the freedom and liberation of all African people. It's a horrific loss. And Elder Explo Nani Kofi, now ancestor, we remember. The next libation is to Joshua Adefi. Again, that's another one I just recently found out about. He joined the ancestors at the age of 20. He is from Bestwood. He fell ill with severe stomach pains at his student accommodation on the morning of September the 28th. And he was pronounced dead by paramedics just hours later. Now, what makes this even more tragic, not just his age, which like at 20, he hadn't even lived, but he'd just moved to Manchester to begin a program of study. Now, his two brothers, Daniel and Joe, who were visiting him at the time, had been left in shock by his death, which they say was caused by a blocked bowel. But they describe him as someone who was extremely fit and in peak condition. And they also raised concern about the emergency service response, claiming that the Manchester Metropolitan student, that's where he was, had been advised to take some paracetamol and to go to A&E instead of being sent an ambulance. Now, we've heard of these kind of situations with patients with sickle cell where, you make a call to the emergency services and they feel, no, this isn't serious, just take an aspirin, take a pill, you'll be fine, go to A&E if it gets worse. That wasn't the case here, and so he joined the ancestors. The brothers are obviously are distraught. They say that he was suffering from cold sweats and struggling to move and breathe. I don't know if there's an investigation into the situation, but either way, he's no longer with us. He's now in the ancestral realm. And this program doesn't just remember those names of those people from our community who are famous or infamous or who done so much for our community. We also remember the lost potential. We also remember those who joined the ancestors before they've had a time to make their contribution in the way that they would have done and had to join us now from another realm. So Joshua Adefi, we remember you. The next libation is to, this one brings back memories, Isaiah Young Sam, who on the 22nd of October 2005 was walking down the streets of Lascelles in Birmingham following a recent community campaign launch. They were trying to avoid conflict because there was a brewing issue that had taken place. I'm not going to rehash that now, in 2005. And as they approached their home, up to 3 cars pulled up in front of them, and a group of 10 to 11 men wearing hooded tops and bandanas got out. Now, sensing trouble, our young brother Isaiah and his friends ran from the scene, but they were pursued by a gang, and these were Asian men who followed them, hurling anti-African abuse at them. Tragically, Isaiah, who was a computer analyst in Birmingham City Council, he fell behind and he was surrounded by the knife-wielding mob. They savagely attacked him, punched him as he lay on the floor before stabbing him in the heart. Isaiah's friend, Lockley Byfield, also suffered a non-life-threatening stab wound to the rear. The assailants were Waqar Ahmed, 26, Azil Khan, 23, and Azal Khan, 22. They were sentenced to life. They were found. And the judge made the point that Isaiah was killed for no other reason than the color of his skin. It was a racist, Afrophobic attack. But nonetheless, he's no longer with us. His family had to deal with that trauma. It's 20 years that took place, and we don't forget. We remember. It's our young Sam. We also remember Raila Odinga, who was Kenya's former prime minister and veteran opposition. Some people call him a firebrand, who joined the ancestors at the age of 80. Now, he was best known as one of Africa's politicians who pushed back and fought for democratic representation amongst the generation, despite running unsuccessfully for presidency 5 times. He was seen as a champion of the oppressed. He passed from a heart attack this week on Wednesday while undergoing medical treatment in India. There's much that could be said about him. People argue that he would have probably won the 2007 election were it not for vote rigging. There was so much life lost during that election. Over 1,000 people died, and this is something he hated. He would never have wanted to have happened. But I just read a quote from one of the politicians' most loyal lades, Salim Lon, and he says, "Millions of hearts have been broken, mourning the passing of a leader who was never allowed to be president." He was a president in our hearts. He was a champion of the people. And yes, Raila Odinga, we remember. The last libation I want to remember is that magnificent act that took place on the 16th of October, 1968, after the Olympic sprinters Tommy Smith and John Carlos raised their black glove fists in the famous, and I say famous, or powerful Black Power salute during the medal ceremony at the Mexico City Olympics. Now, they were joined, and you can see him in the image, by Peter Norman of Australia, who wore the badge of the Olympic Project for Human Rights, the OPHR, and this was in support of Smith and Carlos's protest. People sometimes forget that Peter Norman also contributed to this protest, even though he didn't raise the fist. He was very supportive of it. But what we also know now is that Carlos and Smith were expelled from the games. They received death threats. Their lives fell to pieces after this momentous act. They were called treasonous. They were ostracized from US sporting establishment. But their protest, their silent protest, this magnificent gesture, this magnificent act, and let's be clear, right? They were on the podium for merit. So those who claim that meritocracy is everything, well, they won the race, right? They were there because they were the best. And they used that position, that podium, to bring light to the discrimination and violence that was being targeted at African-American communities at that time. You got to remember in 1968 that the Olympics came after a summer of unrest, which followed the assassinations of not just our brother Omowale Malcolm X, but also Dr. Martin Luther King, and in April, the murder of Robert Kennedy. So, yeah, Tommy Smith, John Carlos, and to some degree, Peter Norman, we remember. Okay, and that's the last slide. Sister Oleander, you see you with us?
Yeah, so there's just a few comments I just wanted to share with you. So Amma says, "Good evening, all's well with the volume. Thanks."
Thank you. Give thanks for the feedback.
Yep. And then we have Brother Howard saying, "Hi, Dr. Toyin and Sister Oleander. Nice to see you both in action again. What is a man without their helpmate? A strong, supportive lady."
Oh, thank you. And yes.
um, and yeah. Oh, wait. Yeah. So Jonathan says, "Respect, Brother Toyin, and rest in peace."
Greetings and respect. Thank you for feedback and letting us know that we're going out and that you can hear us. And yeah, it's the program. We have a lot to go through, a lot of news. Buckle up. I've got my water here because I know I'm going to need it. And of course, if there's any questions, any comments, please feel free. Let me move to the next slide just so you know, because we're going to go through that part of the program we called UK News. You are watching the Galleys Pan-African Community News Update. But the next section looks at, oops, sorry, I think I sat on my keyboard. The next section looks at the general domestic news affecting our community in the UK. So hold on, let me do that. And let me get started. Yikes. So the first story, I want a big close up on that one if we can, because he's not a very pleasant person. I want you to remind you, this is DJ and broadcaster Tim Westwood, and he's been charged with 4 counts of rape and several sexual offences against, in fact, I was going to say several women, but it's actually 7 women. And this is instance running from 1983 to 2016. Now, officers have said that their investigations remain open. They're urging anyone with further information to come forward. His charges, like I said, include 9 counts of indecent assault, 2 counts of sexual assault. The alleged offences of rape of women, or females, I should say, because some of them are teenagers, aged between 17 and 20 in London between 1995 and 2010. And the most recent was an alleged offence in the form of a sexual assault of a woman in her 20s in Finchley in 2016. And I'm not sure, I think he's still in Nigeria. That's the last I heard of him, playing sets over there. So, this stuff just makes my stomach turn. He's been charged. Let's see what happens. I'm not going to try and prejudice the case. I hope that the case does move forward and it's not another situation of someone who many people believe is a predator and has been a predator for several decades in our community. Kind of like we don't want them to escape justice. Okay, this story is about a popular group of restaurants, 4 of them actually, African, Caribbean and South American restaurants, that have been evicted from a new shopping mall in Elephant and Castle in South London. Now, we saw this on, I think it was on BBC London News actually. So those of you who have been with the programme for a few years will know that there's been what they call gentrification, redevelopment, whatever term you want to use, in that region, taking down the old Pink Elephant and building luxury flats which have insufficient number of what they call affordable homes in it. But it's not just displacing residents, the displacement of residents that's causing the problem, it's also the displacement of businesses. So, I mean, here you can see the image is our elder Faye Gomes from Suffolk. She previously ran her Guyanese food business in the old shopping centre for several years before it was closed down in 2020 to be demolished. But when she was moved, she relocated to a temporary retail hub called Castle Square. And that's the news story that we was watching. And she was promised that she can operate her business there until the new development where the old Elephant and Castle shopping centre officially opens next year, 2026. But what we now know is that last week, she and other businesses, like I said, a mixture of African, Caribbean, South American businesses, have now all been locked out of their premises. And the reason they're citing is an unpaid electric bill, which she, first of all, insists that she has been paying. But she also recalls that when they first moved to the location, they were told that they were going to have the first year of electricity for free. This was part of the condition. But after the first year, Gomez, our sister in the image, she received her first electricity bill, and that was for £12,000. And she was like, hold on, we just started, we just moved into this new area. You told us we'd have electricity for free. You know, we're trying to rebuild our clientele because people couldn't find us. What's going on? And if I remember correctly with the news story, what the proprietors are saying is like, look, you can have this payment plan. So as long as you pay it over X amount of time, and you know, then you can stay, but you have to stick to this payment plan. And we know that those kind of things cripple businesses. Or we can cancel the debt, but you'd have to move out. And this is the plan that they seem to be moving on, evicting these small businesses that cannot afford to pay these payment plans and can't afford to have this debt around their necks. So, you know, if this was done by politicians, I would say this goes in the politics section, but it's actually just ruthless developer capitalism in London. And so we're going to keep an eye on this, but it's an outrageous situation, and I don't think it's going to get better anytime soon. Again, other acts of politics that are not coming from politicians, but this is what we call a row over restitution of African arts. Now, I think the Observer did a really good piece on this last week, which was basically telling the story how we had this clamour, and we've been covering this as an organisation for quite a few years, as clamour to see the restitution and return of African artefacts back to their homes. And I'm talking about the plundered and looted kind of artifacts that belong to the people. And in this particular case, there was a real excitement over the fact that many of the Benin bronzes would end up in a new museum called the Museum of West African Art in Benin. But I feel so embarrassed even saying this. But what's gone wrong? Well, they've ended up with clay replicas and not the Benin bronze. And you mean like, well, what we never ended up with clay replicas? Was this duplicitous? No, it wasn't duplicitous. What happened was that even though a lot of museums, including the British Museum, started making noises and squealing and started committing that they would return the bronzes bit by bit, as soon as that became clear, there were contestations about where the bronzes should go to. So we have representatives from the Nigerian government saying that they should go directly to them. You had the Oba saying it was stolen, you know, from Edo State. It was stolen from my family. Should be returned to the family. And while these contested claims are taking place, they're not moving. I mean, some parts are moving, you know, different countries in Germany, and I think that's the image there is one from in Germany, and some nations are sending them to different spaces, but they're not coming back in mass because, you know, I don't want to say this because it sounds really bad, but it's almost as like we can't get our act together. Everyone wants to benefit from it. I kind of get that. It is a difficult topic. Who owns it? Who has the right to it? But you've got to remember that this museum that was built is $25 million. That's 19 million pounds. State-of-art museum was built. It was co-funded by European governments and Western enterprises, and it was supposed to be leading up to this crowning moment after a century of long efforts to reclaim these artifacts. And now we've kind of ended up with clay replicas. So there's still work to go, but I can't even just say that the argument is solely within the West. I will now say that this is when Pan-Africanism becomes very important, and it becomes a discussion that has to happen internally to make sure that we don't lose this moment. You know, it's not that it's our fault, and I'm not saying that for 1 second, but we have to seize this moment. I'm going to move on. There's a complex story. Okay, the next one is a story about former England centre Luther Burrell, who has, in a media interview, described racism as being rife in the game of rugby. And he showed various WhatsApp messages to journalists and recalled some of the training ground so-called jokes that he was subjected to while playing for Newcastle. His treatment was horrific, and he said that, look, it eventually spurred him to speak out, because one of the situations that happened was that he was at Newcastle and a teammate referred to him as a slave and told him to put the sun cream on his wrists and his ankles where your shackles were. And he thought that this was funny. Ha, 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 ha. Put it where your shackles were, and for some kind of joke. And our brother Burrell says, look, or Luther says, I wanted to keep on playing. Of course I did. And I tried, but it fell through. And when word came out that there were investigations going on, because he started to make complaints, it became difficult. And in the end, he just said, look, I've got to accept my fate and accept this whole process is a lot bigger than me. And so, it's good that he's standing up. But the idea that him going public and revealing racism inside the sport, and that costing him his career, is something it shouldn't be happening in 2025. We spoke about kicking racism out of football last week when we poured libation for Herman Ousley. But work has to happen across all sectors of British sport, not just football, also rugby. And just so you know, one of the industry bodies, RFU, found his allegations were true on the balance of probability, but not enough evidence existed to say it happened at Newcastle. So this is like a meaty mouth excuse. They're saying, look, we recognize that it's probably true that you're exposed to racism, but we can't say it happened at Newcastle. We can just say it happened in rugby somewhere. And this is the problem, right? Because what our brother Luther's telling us is that racism has just become normalized in the dressing room. In fact, he says it's something that's been dressed up as banter. And that's been the problem that I've personally suffered and seen. And he says over a period of time, you just learn to believe that it's the norm and that it's fine and it's not malicious, but that's nonsense. And we know that's nonsense because we've heard this talk in another institution in the UK. We've heard it in policing. And we're going to come back to policing because that's not the only sector where so-called racist banter is just a laugh. It's just a joke and it harms and it costs us our career. But let me move on to the next story. Now, you might have seen this one on social media. This is a tale of where 4 young people had been arrested after a young African man with special needs was assaulted at a skate park in Wolverhampton. Now, I should make it clear that this happened on the 9th of August this year, and that his assailants, a girl aged 17, another boy aged 18, and 2 men aged 22 and 23, had been arrested on suspicion of wounding with intent to do grievous bodily harm. But the West Midland Police believe that there's no evidence at this stage of any racial motivation for the attack. Now, I don't know. I don't know. I know what I saw in that clip, and it's a horrific clip. I wouldn't suggest you look at it. He's got special needs and he's been abused. And yes, he's of African heritage. I don't know whether I don't know what they're saying. I do know what some of them are saying, but I don't know if it's motivated by racism. I suspect it is. If you're asking my opinion, I suspect that they wouldn't do this to someone else of a different ethnic background, but I can't prove that. And that's what the police investigation is for. The good thing is that he's been arrested. The disgusting thing that we have to ask ourselves is, if this hadn't been shared on social media, bearing in mind this took place in August this year, if this hadn't been shared on social media, would the police have acted? Would we now be having an investigation into the situation? We know that there's going to be excuses that this isn't racism, they're just being horrible to someone with special needs, and he just happened to be an African. We know all the nonsense is going to come around that. But that's the other question. Why wasn't this investigated? Why was someone, a vulnerable person, assaulted at a skate park? And this is the first time we're hearing of it. I'm going to leave that one there, and hopefully we'll follow that up, and we'll see what happens, and we'll see if those young people, including the 2 young men, because they're teenagers and young men, if they end up being charged, because being arrested is not the same thing as being charged and prosecuted. Okay, sometimes we wonder where this comes from. Give me 1 second. Where does this all come from? Well, when you have young people involved in these kind of assaults, you have to recognize the fact that it doesn't just happen because people are on social media, but sometimes it's cultivated in the home, and sometimes it's encouraged through bad behavior and bad policies in schools. And a new study involving almost 300 young people, parents, and educators across Suffolk and Lambeth has actually now revealed that there's a stark disconnect between what schools are saying in their equity statements and the lived reality of students of African heritage. Now, there's been, like I said, a report published by the Race Equality and Education Group, REEG, and they've highlighted that minority ethnic students feel that their emotions are now being policed. I say now, they've long time been policed, but they're being policed in the classrooms. You know, we know about Afrophobia. We learn about adultification with Child Q. And so not only are we seeing our children become the victims of racist abuse, of people who are imbibing white supremacist ideas, but they're also not being listened to. And if they want to respond, they're being policed in spaces where they're supposed to feel safe. Now, this report documents how young people lose trust and with the staff and only can rely on their peers when experiencing racism in school. And this essentially is exposing a serious safeguarding gap, right? Because if young people cannot go to their teachers and their educators when they're facing racial abuse, and they can only talk to their peers, then one day, again, I should say, because this has happened in the past, the threshold will be crossed. And so, you know, this is an important piece of research that's taken place. It's an important issue that has to be looked and addressed at. The research, which used what we call a participatory action approach, was co-designed and delivered by many African heritage organizations. And they want to see schools doing more than just giving lip service, because a lot of these anti-racist charters that they came up with occurred post 2020 after the murder of George Floyd. And so people want to see structural change, not performative actions. They want to see real structural change, a change in the schools. And Joel Dunn, who was the founder of Paradigm Project and the lead researcher of this report, said, "We have to move beyond statements and slogans." I think we remember the Black Square moment. We remember the bended knee, Black Lives Matter moment. We need to see systemic and structural change, or else our children are going to continue suffering in Britain's schools. The next story is one that I literally can't make up, right? We have this ridiculous tale of the 3-year-old Zaria Ray, who you can see, or Zaria Ray, I think is how you pronounce it, in the image with her mother, who's been denied a passport and being asked to prove the right to access free NHS treatment. Now, many people are saying, "Oh, this is the Windrush scandal, you know, again in a different form," because you see, Zaria Ray's mother, Tracy Ann Dunkley, she's been a British citizen since 2024, and Zaria Ray's older brother, who's born to the same parents, has been a British citizen in 2020 when he was given a British passport in 2022. But Dunkley, from the Caribbean island, which is the mother, Tracy Ann Dunkley, she comes from Anguilla, which is what they call a British overseas territory. And she's been told now by officials that her daughter was not eligible for a British passport. And she's been classified as a BOT citizen, like I said, British Overseas Territory citizen, which differs from full British citizenship. And this limits her rights and privileges in the UK. So I hope you get that, you're clear about that. That our princess was born in the UK. Her parents have British citizenship. But because she has heritage in Anguilla, they're saying that her daughter cannot have full British citizenship. And what we're seeing again is the Windrush. We're seeing different tiers of British citizenship. Now, the mother has also been sent letters demanding proof that her child, who was, first of all, born in Birmingham, she's got hip dysplasia, she's non-verbal, and is now actually currently being assessed for autism, is entitled to free NHS treatment. She has to now find proof of this. And when you talk to the Home Office, What they're saying is, we do not comment on individual cases. A child born in the UK will acquire British citizenship if at the time of birth at least one parent is either a British citizen or settled in the UK. While they're saying this, on with one hand, the Home Office is also, denying her passport and blocking her access to free NHS treatment. So again, this is the UK 2025. Next story. I don't know. This is the story of the nurse Paul Brian Vogler. And he's been struck off for making sexual and racist comments at work. Now, he served in a prison, and he was asking inappropriate questions to not just prisoners, but also to his colleagues. I don't know what else to say, really. He had been suspended for this in the past, but thankfully, I think it's the NMC, the National Midwifery College. I think they're the ones who are the regulatory body. They went through the evidence and found clearly that he's putting patients at risk, at harm with his comments. He shouldn't be a nurse, and he's gone. He's no longer in the service. He no longer can actually serve, or as a nurse. He's off the register. I don't really want to go on much. I couldn't find an image of him, which is what I was looking for. I think sometimes it's nice to see their face, have that, the infamy, let them relish in it. But unfortunately, I couldn't find any information. So that's the last one on for this section. That's the last story on UK news. The next section is policing. Something just went strange. I hope we're still on. Are we still on? Can everyone hear me okay? That's bizarre. Oh, okay, technology. Okay, you are watching the Galleys Pan-African Community News Update. We are live, and that's what sort of thing that happens when you're live. You're welcome to interact with us through Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, whichever platform you're on live. The streams are normally recorded, so if you miss this, it's fine. You can watch it later on. As ever, please don't forget to subscribe. You can like it. You can share it if you find the broadcast useful. I don't really care about algorithms, so don't stress over it. But what I do care about is that if you know someone in the community who could benefit from knowing about these stories, people who say, well, things aren't so bad in the UK. It's not as bad as in America. Send them a copy, send them a link. We have a lot of work to do in our community, lifting the political consciousness. But again, this is just going over what we've been discussing over, or what we've just heard about over the last 2 weeks. And I need to stress that 2 weeks. Okay, it's not a year's worth of news. This is 2 weeks worth of stories. Okay, so the next story is okay. We spoke last week about the police recording. I think it was BBC Panorama program that exposed the Metropolitan Police. There were some officers who exposed making racist comments, misogynistic comments, and to its credit where credit's due, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the IOPC, has decided that 10 of the officers who were based at Charing Cross Police Station should face what they're calling accelerated misconduct hearings. And that's what's going on, right? Normally this sort of stuff takes like, a few years, 3-4 years, sometimes 10 years, sometimes 20 years. Normally they resign from the force and then they investigate them and then they leave on pensions with full salary. But this time, actually, the police have actually dealt with them. And this is part of the, I guess, the anti-racist plan that the police or the Metropolitan Police are working through. And I give their credit, the IOPC have done this. And that they have said that the 10 officers consist of 8 serving Metropolitan Police officers, 3 of them who were sergeants, 5 of them were constables, and the other 2, or the others who, out of the 10, had left from the Met or had moved from the Met. So one serving, I can't remember, Huddersfield or something, I can't remember the name of the force, but it's outside London, and the other one had actually resigned. So maybe that one's getting their pension. And of course, the Met Commissioner, Mark Rowley, is making all the usual noises. We have worked together to deliver this uncompromising approach at greater speed than ever before, and the hearings will take place by the end of the month. I'm not going to knock him. This is actually a really good development. Is it enough to let us have trust in the Metropolitan Police? Not enough yet. Still a long way to go. But is it in the right direction? Well, clearly the anti-racist plan is starting to bear fruit. But is that because there's been so many damning inquiries, investigations into the Met? Well, of course, that's the reality of the situation. But I'm glad, I want to say that the commissioner right at the top is saying that if we catch you engaging in this practice, then we will do everything we can to speed up getting you out of the force. The biggest problem, of course, is that they shouldn't have been recruited in the force. They shouldn't have, and that's where the issue is. And some of the really rotten, and it's not a few rotten apples, some of the rotten officers, the most racist ones at the core, are now in senior positions and they're protected. And that's really where the work has to be done. How do you get rid of them? How do you, who's going to expose them? Who's going to tell the truth so that they can't just continue to kind of influence the younger officers who come into the force with impunity? But that's that story. I said there's a lot to talk through, so I'm going to move on. The image you're seeing on the screen right now is that of Jodian Taylor. Wow, she is furious. And she has confronted her son's killer in court. I should give you the backdrop, because two teenagers, again, these are children, two teenagers were sentenced for killing her son, who was 15 years old, Dejon Campbell, last year. This case is one of an epidemic of knife crime on our streets, and I'm talking about in London. I could give you the details. I mean, he was killed in Woolwich. 3 teenagers attacked him as he walked past a residential house. People don't know why he was attacked. The police think it was what they called a G check-in. They believe that he was a suspected rival gang member. We don't know if he was. We don't know anything. We just know that he was walking on the street. 3 young teenagers thought he was a gang member. They attacked him. They killed him. Eyewitnesses there said that Dejon tried to flee. He ran from them, but they caught up with him. And then they hit him multiple times with a machete. And according to the eyewitness, he shouted, "I'm 15, don't let me die." I'll say that again. He said, "I'm 15, don't let me die." And the other teenagers just continued to stab him with a machete. Now, the trial has just finished. It was a 6-week trial in the Old Bailey. And, 2 of them were found guilty. 19-year-old Marco Balaz of Abbey Wood in southeast London was convicted of manslaughter. An 18-year-old Imre Du was found guilty of murder. And you think that, okay, well, justice, it doesn't bring him back, but justice has been served. So why is his mum so angry? I mean, other than the pain, why is she so angry? And why is she furious with the system that she says has failed him? Well, because now we know that both of those young teenagers, those boys, were well known to the authorities. They had previous convictions. They had carried knives, machetes, drugs. They'd committed violence. In fact, the boy, I think who did the stabbing, one of the ones, he had an ankle tag or something on him, if I remember correctly. And so they took it off. And so our sister, the mother, Jodian, who lost a child, she says the authorities knew who these boys were. They always do. They had chances to act and didn't. The system keeps giving second chances to those who destroy lives and no chance to the lives that they destroyed. And I feel that. As a parent, what can I say? I feel that. I believe in rehabilitation. I believe in education. But if you have children who are persistently engaging in drugs and violence and they're hurting and maiming, then we have to improve the system to prevent them from harming others. There's not much more I can say on that. She has said so much, and you might want to read the article that covers her pain and her argument. But But I'm going to leave that one there. I'm not sure if actually this is the case with the tag. I'd have to remember. I think there's another story coming up with the tag. So this story is a case of, I don't know if you remember Jermaine Baker, who was an unarmed man, who was a young man, 28. He was shot and killed in a failed attempt to release or spring a gang leader from prison. Now, again, these cases are always problematic because people say, well, he's involved in badness, right? And yeah, he was. I'm not going to even say he wasn't. They found in the car that there was a replica submachine gun. It wasn't, from the sound of it wasn't working. It was just a replica there. And so the firearms officer can use the defense that he was in fear of his life. Was he in fear of his life, though? Well, it doesn't look that way. But did he use excessive force when he shot him dead, when he was sitting as a passenger? It does look that way. But the misconduct hearing has said, no, I'm going to drop the case. Do we know the name of the officer? No. All we know him is as W80. So he's taken someone's life, and we don't know who he is. It's kind of like those ICE officers in America where we have in law enforcement agencies masking up, public officials masking up. Do you remember all that stuff in France about the burqa and why it's important to see people's faces and why just seeing their eyes is not enough? Well, in this case, we now have a firearms officer. We don't know his name. He's taken someone's life. The person whose life is taken is unarmed. And the Crown Prosecution Service in 2017, after he was murdered, said that there was insufficient evidence to bring criminal charges against him. And I saw the same police commissioner, Rowley, on TV. I can't remember exactly what he was saying, but you heard what he said on the other case. But in this one, I remember I was watching the news, and out of his mouth was this, too many times good officers have to make split-second decisions. And what's happening is that then once they made that split-second decision, they're being pulled in front of misconduct bodies, they're pulled in front of, like trials and all this kind of stuff. And this shouldn't happen. And I was watching that thinking, you're talking a load of nonsense. Any human being that takes the life of another human being should face questions about their actions. And I'm not happy that the charge has been dropped. But any kind of suggestion, any hint that because you're a police officer and, you're running around with a gun, and I don't know if you remember some of the stories we spoke about last year about the toxic nature of the firearms unit within the Metropolitan Police, especially the Royal Protections Unit, the misogyny, the racism, the homophobia, they were out of control. This testosterone-fueled unit of the Metropolitan Police, anyone involved in this has to face massive amount of scrutiny when they killed someone who's unarmed. It's the same thing with what happened with Mark Duggan. We're not at Judge Dredd stage yet, where the police officers are also judge, jury, and executioner. But here's the case. They've dropped it. And so Jermaine Baker, it's unlikely he'll ever face justice if we ever find out 10 years from now, 20 years from now, that actually the firearms officer, who we only know as W80, so he can now resign and become a school teacher or prime minister, whoever, we don't know. Okay, the next story, police officer. Meet PC Perry Layford. You may remember him, the 51-year-old Metropolitan Police Constable who used excessive violence against Mrs. Ajiman in front of her child. And this is that story. I think we actually did show the video at the time. It's really, really upsetting, where she was being, kind of like handcuffed and abused, physically abused, because he believed that she had dodged her fear. I mean, let's, and I think we had this discussion, right? Even if she had dodged her fear, under what circumstances did that level of force, was that level of force warranted? Even if she had, dodged the fear, under what circumstances was it okay for a police officer to use that level of force in front of her child and traumatize the small child that was with her. But what we now know, in fact, we found out at the time, was that once her Oyster card was checked, she had paid for her fare. And so they de-arrested her at the scene. Now, I'm not going to go back over that case. We had that discussion. But I just want to remind you that, he was investigated. They found him guilty of misconduct, but they didn't find him guilty of using excessive force. And so you've got to remember, he was found guilty of, given written warning of using disrespectful language. Now, our sister, Joycelyn Agyemang, she didn't deserve the abuse that she received. People are trying to say that she was anti-police and her conduct wasn't so good. She hadn't done anything wrong. Your conduct wouldn't be so good if someone accuses you of something you haven't done and then comes to you with force in front of your child. There's a good chance that you'd say, "What on earth are you doing? Leave me alone. Get away from me." But anyway, he was cleared of that aspect, the use of excessive force. And so all he's got to do is receive a written warning for saying naughty words. I'm not happy with this at all. So whatever you read about this case, and if it spins it as if he's been punished, no, he hasn't. And just to be clear on this, what's happened in the media, if you can search the story, you'll find out that different community groups in the area, legal practices, members of public, even Crystal Palace's Homedale's fanatics, that's what they call themselves, have lodged formal complaints about him. They're saying that he has consistently demonstrated aggressive behavior, and they declare him a threat to the public. Now, there's nothing else that can be done. He's been cleared of misconduct, or violent misconduct, just guilty of breaching professional standards by using disrespectful language. This is really, when we talk about institutional racism and structural, like injustice, structural violence, systemic change that's needed, this is the sort of thing that we're talking about. Because if he can get away with that like that, when there's evidence, again, something's not quite right with the processes that are occurring. I wasn't there in that space, but there we go. Sister Oleander.
Yeah, so just a couple of comments. So Brother Howard says, they make me sick. The British establishment, the biggest gangsters in the world. And I think that was in reference to a previous story. I've forgotten what it was now, but it was in reference to people. But even in this, what you're just reading out here, it's still relevant to this too.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you, Howard. I mean, yeah, it's outrageous. And the gangsterism doesn't end there. But we haven't even dealt with politics yet. If you think this is bad, there's more to come.
Okay, so IC3CSI sends greetings.
Greetings. Good to have you with us.
And Cosmic Jedi sending greetings as well.
Greetings as well. Good to have you with us. Still love that name.
Yeah, I know. It's great, isn't it? Also, Cosmic Jedi says that Judge Dredd reference was both bitter and sweet.
Yeah, I hear that. I grew up watching or reading 2000 AD, the comics. I still have a few from back in the day. And Judge Dredd was actually, when I was a young man, he was, you saw him as a hero because it's kind of like, like a future version of what's his name, Dirty Harry. But then as you get older, you realize actually, as much as you kind of like the idea of like the bad people not getting off, and you have someone who's involved in the law making serious decisions to make sure that the bad people get caught, you start to learn that actually Dirty Harry, there are times when you've got to do a bit of a Bruce Wayne move to kind of like deal with like the worst kind of criminals, but it's not something we should normalize. It's not right. And Judge Dredd, even though I did love the Judge Dredd film with Kurt Alban, it's just superb. That's not what we pay the police for.
No.
And this idea that they can execute people, no way.
No.
I'll continue. Okay, so the next story is the Metropolitan Police. Now, the last stories I just covered were the Metropolitan Police. But surprise, surprise, surprise. We learned this week that there was a review of Afrophobia within the Metropolitan Police. Did you hear about it? I didn't hear about it. Did you hear about it? Did you see it? Did you watch it on the news? Did you hear it on the radio? Was it in the newspapers? No, no one heard about it. No. Why didn't we hear about it? Well, because they buried it. And this wasn't, let's be clear, this wasn't a review of just racism within the Metropolitan Police. It was specifically looking at Afrophobia in the Metropolitan Police. This is kind of the reason why, as an anthropologist, as an academic, this is the sort of work I want to do, because they can commission these pieces of work and then bury the report. Now, this report was, this internal review, it was commissioned by the Met, so the Met paid for it. And it came from the consultancy HR Rewired. And I think sometimes when they commission consultancies, they hope that, well, you know, we're going to give you a nice chunk of money to investigate us and look into us, but kind of like make sure you kind of come up with a nice, you know, don't be so hard on us. But this report apparently concluded that there was bias, racial stereotyping, inequity, and it was woven throughout the force's recruitment, promotion, and grievance process. And it affected African staff specifically. So this wasn't just about what they do on the streets. This wasn't so much about what they do to us as the members of the public. This was actually just looking internally. If you join the Metropolitan Police Force, how are you treated? You know, does that racism only exist going outwards, or are you internally facing these kind of Afrophobic approaches? And of course, this report, called The 30 Patterns of Harm, a Structural Review of Systemic Racism within the London Metropolitan Police Service, warned that the Met's ambition to become an anti-racist organisation was actually being undermined by its own internal culture. Now, the image on the right is a colleague of mine, Andy George, and he's a good egg. You know, he's based in Northern Ireland. He's been the president of the National Black Police Association, I think, for as long as ever since Leroy Logan stepped down. And he's another one who really kind of like pushed hard after they came for him. He pushed back. You know, they've been gunning for Andy, and he found out about this. He said, I learned about it in August. He asked the Met for a copy of the report in September, but a member of the senior leadership team said, no, I'm not sharing that with you. No, what? Give it to the MBPA, the National Black Police Association. Are you crazy? He said, no, this report is only going to be shared with senior management. And Andy said that, look, this report, I've been told it's really damning. I mean, it's really, really bad. So we can't see it, right? We pay for the police. The police are paid to serve us. Well, that's what we are told. That's the myth, right? Protect and serve. We know it's something else. Protect property as opposed to protect humans. And we can't have access to this report. So again, these are the things to watch out. But that line, that the Metropolitan Police's ambition to become anti-racist is being undermined by its own internal culture, is something to look out for. This is very, very important. It's also going to talk very much to the next story. Please try not to throw up. Yes, this is a Tory minister. This is a Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Phelps. And he, at the recent Conservative Party, you know, kind of like conference, told the members that he's going to scrap the anti-racism commitment plan published by the College of Policing. And he said the whole thing was just absurd. So the police are struggling, let's just contextualize it. The police are struggling to kind of like follow their own plan. So the Met is doing it a little bit better because it's getting rid of bad officers in a faster time frame than it used to. Still got problems. We saw that in Charing Cross, not gone away. You know, report after report, it's not gone away. But they're following the plan, and we're seeing slow changes, which means that maybe not my children, but their children's children might see a police force that is starting to kind of like have the scent of perhaps being committed to some form of anti-racism. So, you know, there is something. But other police forces around the UK, no, that's not happening. Like you saw with the other story where the police officer left the Met and went to another police force. He just exported everything he learned. You know how they say that when people go to prison, if you don't do rehabilitation, you go into prison and you learn skills like criminal skills, and you come into society and you're a better criminal. I say better in the wrong, it's the wrong way around, but a criminal with more skills of how to commit crimes. It's the same thing with the police. You go into the flagship, which is the Metropolitan Police. You're exposed to the most senior kind of racist, like supervisors. So you see how they roll, how they hide everything, what they do, mask on, mask off. Remember we were talking about this last week, and then they export it to the different police forces around the UK. Well, now what Phelps is saying is that I'm not just having my eyes on the Metropolitan Police. Nah. I'm going to scrap all the anti-racism commitment plans across the UK. And he also went as far as to say, we're going to bring in, 10,000 extra police officers. Yeah, it's going to cost us 800 million a year, but that's what we're going to do. And we're going to use some of those extra officers to deliver surge hotspot policing. That's what he called it. Surge hotspot policing, and they're going to go into 2,000 high crime neighborhoods around the country, right? And you can see the map that I put there. That map is what we call a lower layer super output areas, and they are smaller areas. In that particular map there is where the hotspots of knife crime are in London. There's normally around 1,000 to 3,000 people in each of those spots. And so what he's going to do, he's going to find 2,000 of those spots all up and down the UK, and he's going to send 10,000 extra officers into there to stamp down on knife crime, and he vowed he's going to triple stop and search if he becomes Home Secretary, because it's not enough to harass children, to harass elders, to harass innocent people going to work. No, that's not enough. He wants to triple it. Sister Oleander.
No, sorry, there was a bit of a technical issue there. I'll put you back.
Okay. Yeah, I think Sister Oleander was just outraged, just like I was. That's the plan. I'll move on, because this is the tip of the iceberg. It gets worse. So this is the last story for policing this week, as if that wasn't bad enough. Remember I just spoke about someone who's wearing an ankle tag. Okay, that's to do with this story. Yeah, because again, and it's something I'm very conscious of, and we've been conscious of this for as long as this program's been running, even when we was Jan Sappo on the radio running our program. In fact, I missed Jan Sappo because we used to have music in the background as well, which was quite nice, and we don't do that on YouTube. It's a bit complex to find a way to fix that. This is the story of the mother of executed, and I use the word executed on purpose, Jessie Lloyd Smith. And she, angry like the former mother I just introduced you to, has branded the judge who convicted the murderers of her son as weak, and said that they had blood, or sort of he had blood on his hands. Now, just to give you a bit of context for this, Gabriel Charles, who was wearing an ankle tag at the time, shot and murdered Jessie Lloyd Smith, the young brother in the picture, who was aged 20, 5 times in an alley next to his mother's home in Peckham. Now, this took place in July last year. Now, his mum found her son lying on the ground with bullet wounds to his head. How do you live with this? But they found him. They found Gabriel Charles, the 19-year-old, the teenager that murdered her son. And the judge, Patrick Field, KC, he jailed Charles for life. He says he got a minimum term of 28 years. And, you'd think, okay, we know we're not going to get into a discussion about minimum terms, but he's been caught, he's been jailed. But he also said that he couldn't be certain whether Charles was the gunman or the driver. So there was someone else who was involved, and this was someone called Quine J.M. Pierre, another teenager, 18 years, of Cambridgeshire. That's where he came from. Now, he was allegedly in the Ford S-Max, which drove Charles to our young boy, Lloyd Smith. But Pierre, or Quine Pierre, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name, was cleared of murder. And instead, he was jailed for 3 years. So you understand this, right? So the person who they think murdered him, they both were involved in the murder. And again, I've got to be careful because I'm not advocating for joint enterprise either. So they drove to find the boy. It was an execution. I'm not going to go into all the backgrounds, but it was an execution. They didn't kill him straight away. They held him and then they killed him 5 times in his head. They shot him, they shot him, what I mean, whatever it was. They held him, drove him, and now they don't know which one pulled, which one, are we 100% sure? And so they said 3 years for one of them. And as he was jailed for 3 years, Jesse Lloyd Smith's mum said, "You're a murderer and you will pay for murdering my son." As she said that, the public gallery exploded into applause. Now, I don't want to go into this whole vigilante thing, especially since we've just been talking about Judge Dredd, and I don't know how I would feel if I saw one of the people involved in the murder of I don't even put my mirth on it, of a child, kind of like get off with 3 years. I don't think I could cope with that. But when she left the court, she went straight to the media and she said, that judge, he was a weak man and he had blood in his hands. And this is because of that 3-year sentence. And so, we're seeing a trend now where, the boy who murdered her son had an ankle tag on. And this is why I'm saying we've got to really think about these kind of issues. It's difficult because we're talking about African children who are murdering other African children. I'm not running away from that at all. I'm not doing a holy unvow. I'm not saying we don't have problems in our community. But we have to have a grown-up discussion about these kind of things. Because the weapon that was used was a converted pistol. It was what they call a top venting blank firer, which was actually legal to buy in the UK. It's changed now. You had to have a license. I'm not even sure if you can now own it with a license, but you could own it with a license previously, and there was no problem. Now, if you have it, it's like a 10-year jail sentence. And so, I grew up in a time of pushing back against Operation Trident. And what happened when we started taking guns off the streets as a community, we did that work in our community, and then people started to move towards knives. And then we did that work, and then they started moving towards acid. We started trying to work on that, and then slowly but surely, things have got reversed, and then we started coming back to knives, which is where we are now, and we're coming back to guns, which is also where we're moving to. And these are things that we do not want in our community. It's another program to explain why these things are prevalent in our community. We know, places like Glasgow being a knife capital of the UK, we know that this is not an African issue. This is very much a British issue. There's something happening to the young boys, to the children at a young age. But that's another discussion, and not all of us. We're talking about less than 0.1% of our community. Less than 0.1. Let's be very clear. We're talking about, but those lives impact all of us. That's the story. It's something to think about. I'm going to move on because this program's been going on for too long, and we've still got a lot to go through. I did tell you it's quite a lot. 2 weeks. This has all happened in the last fortnight. I've been up since 8 o'clock this morning working on this. It's a lot of news. All right, let's go. All right, I'm going to go into the next section. Let me blank the screen so I can sip some water without you see me dribbling. And this is UK politics. UK politics. Just a reminder, if you're watching us, you are live. This is our Pan-African Community News Update. You're welcome to join us through the chat on Twitter, on YouTube, Facebook, wherever you are. You can also subscribe if you want to do that. You can like, and you can share it with those you think would find it useful. Now, this section, is basically a review of the politics around the UK. And we're going to look at UK's growing anti-rights movement. That's what I've decided to call it. We talk about white supremacy, but we're also going to talk about this new, it's not new, but it's getting stronger, the anti-rights movement, which is kind of like taking away the rights from human beings and really pushing this white supremacist agenda. We might need to have a separate section for that. We used to have a section about white supremacy, but this has been so normalized. It's just politics now. There's no need to have a separate white supremacist. You know how bad that is? There's no need to have a separate white supremacist section because it's now just normal UK politics. I'm going to move on. And I'm going to start with, don't throw up. Yes, that is another Tory. This is the Shadow Justice Secretary, Robert Jenrick. And he got himself in a little bit of trouble. I say a little bit of trouble because there's no real ramifications for what he said and what he does. He got caught out. He was at a dinner, during the spring. It was secret recorded, and he said on camera, or he didn't know he was on camera, that he was in Handsworth, which is in Birmingham, for those of you outside the UK. And he said, oh my God, it's one of the worst integrated places he'd ever been to. He said he'd spent a whole hour and a half there. I mean, it was a very in-depth survey, very much investigative report looking at, who was there. And after an hour and a half, he hadn't seen another white face. He said, oh my God, it's like, at the extreme levels, there's a lack of integration. And this leads us to a very, very dark place as a country. It's a very, very dark place. And they know what they're saying. So, it's kind of like dark place, worse integrated, another white face, all these key words, right? They're just dropping these little seeds and kind of like in the minds of the simple folk, the ones who kind of think racism is the problem to everything, that migration and immigrants are the problem to everything like that. And then, he went around, that was leaked onto the newspapers. So he had to defend his words from accusations of racism, which it was. And he goes, look, it's not about the color of your skin. No, of course it isn't. But I want people to be living alongside each other, not parallel lives, which you might remember was a narrative that was introduced to us by none other than Trevor Phillips when he was a chair of the Commission for Racial Equality. And then he decided that we were living in ghettos and that we have racial equality and therefore we don't need a Commission for Racial Equality. And then he went off to be a right-wing shill and be paid lots of money to betray his entire community. I think he's on Sky News now. You can catch him every week if you want to hear kind of like what I'm not going to use naughty words, what someone who doesn't work for the interests of human beings in our community is. Robert Jenrick. I'm going to move on because Robert Jenrick, what he's saying is not that much different from the next person. And this is Nigel Farage, who is the leader of the Reform Party. And he flew off to America, where the orange one's in charge. And he ran there, running around saying, oh my God, the moment he becomes prime minister, if he becomes prime minister, the teachers would go on strike. If we won, they'd go on strike. And we have to do something about them because they're poisoning our children. They're telling them that African children are victims and European children are oppressors. And, there'd be a strike and we have to stop it now. And this was, during his event in Michigan. That was last month. And this is, I'm not going to repeat all his words because it's a lot of nonsense. But that's the gist. He's saying that the teachers are teaching children narratives that are dividing us, not uniting us. It's coming from Nigel Farage, right? Nigel Farage is claiming that teachers are dividing us, not uniting us. I mean, I can't make this up. Now, there is some pushback. So Daniel Kebede, who's the General Secretary of the National Education Union, and he's normally a good egg, he did push back. He did kind of, he said that this idea that the education system was controlled by Marxists is nonsense, which is true, and I do like that. But he also kind of like said, we're not teaching CRT and that sort of stuff. And see, well, it's kind of like a bad thing. I'm not going to get into that, but sometimes people get, we have to be careful about leaning into narratives. We have to be mindful. There's nothing wrong with critical race theory. Just because it's from America doesn't mean that critical race theory is wrong. We have our own version of what the Americans call critical race theory, looking at history, philosophy, law in tandem with ethnography. All these kind of things is basically equivalent of critical race theory, and it's a good way to understand a problem and to find solutions to the problem. But our brother Daniel, he goes on that Farage has made his political career out of dog whistle politics, and now, like the orange one, he says the name, I don't want to say his name, he is lining up teachers and their unions for a fight. So I've spent a bit too much time on Farage. It's not specifically a Pan-African issue, but he is targeting and talking about our children, right? And, considering the news I've shared earlier, this whole idea that our children are somehow, the teachers are poisoning our children and the teachers are dividing us, when actually our children, who are the vulnerable ones, are being left alone. they're the ones that have been left to fend for themselves. You know, even in prisons, even on the streets, at every part of society, whether they're good, whether they're involved in badness, you know, they are the ones that are hitting, you know, feeling the brunt of this. I think we needed to just talk about that. Now, the next story is a very quick one. It's very good to remind ourselves that as much as we have these doom and gloom merchants out there, there are also people in our community who actually aren't afraid to speak up. And you know, you may know our sister Jackie McKenzie. She's a leading lawyer and race equality campaigner. There are others as well, but she came out this week to saying, "Look, there's been too much silence from the political leaders. They haven't done enough. They haven't been forthright enough in condemning the racism, and they're not addressing the fear that so many large numbers of the UK's citizens, that's us, me, and you, actually feel." It's like the United Kingdom march, the 150,000 far right rabid rednecks on the streets of London just didn't happen, right? There's no discussion about how did we feel. It's like, what's the residue of that? It's like, nothing. And yet, I mean, God, I mean, I'm going to say it. Perhaps I shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it as well. But yeah, I spoke about racism that's taking place in the schools, right? And I talked about racism that's taking place in the NHS. But what has Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, decided to do in response to all this? Well, his decision to deal with Afrophobia in the police, the Afrophobia in the NHS, Afrophobia, is to make it mandatory training to learn about anti-Semitism in the NHS. That's his argument, right? That's what he's going to do. So we have, on one level, we have politicians saying that we've got to scrap anti-racist plans for the police. We now have the Prime Minister saying we need anti-Semitism training, which is made mandatory and compulsory in the NHS. Bearing in mind that by doing that, he's feeding in and supporting the very argument our sister Diane Abbott made, our elder, about there being this hierarchy. So we need other voices coming out saying that these mealy-mouthed politicians are not doing enough. Their silence is emboldening these racists. Sister Oleander.
Yes, so absolutely. And Sister Amma says, Jackie McKenzie is absolutely right. The silence is deafening.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. And it does my head in. I mean, I can't get over. It's like, you have in the shape of Elon Musk, one of the wealthiest immigrants to the United States, stirring up trouble, now paying for the legal defense for Stephen Yaxley, the one they call Tommy Robinson, stirring up far-right extremism in the UK. And even though the smaller parties are making comments, the main party is doing absolutely nothing. I could even talk about the football hooliganism story that's running around now. Maybe that will land next week. So I won't go into that. They're not doing enough, and they're being too silent on this. And they're showing that they don't care about all people with British nationality equally. They don't care about British citizens unless they have European heritage. That's what their actions and inactions and silence is communicating to all of us. They don't care about how we feel. They don't even know how we feel. They don't know, because they know that when those mobs running London, they're not targeting them, they're targeting us.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I don't even think we should call them the Labour Party anymore, because they absolutely have nothing to do with the Labour Party that my father and your father used to vote for back in the day. It's just, there's no comparison whatsoever.
No.
And I think we should find another name for them. And on that note, yeah, I mean, they're just not, they're unrecognizable. And I just think that they're a disgrace.
Yeah, well, the Neo-Labour Party, they are. And thank you. It's point well made. And perhaps this next story is a good reminder about how complicated this is, because I'm sharing a story of it's a big story actually, even though I'm sure many of you haven't even heard about this, right? So we know about the murder of Stephen Lawrence. And there's even a Stephen Lawrence Day in the UK. You might even remember that it was the Daily Mail, one of the most racist papers, if not the most racist paper in the UK, that actually forced the government to actually push the police into investigating this properly, right? Well, what we just found out is that David Norris, one of the men convicted of murdering Stephen, has just admitted, finally, for the first time ever, that he was part of the attack on Stephen. Now, this is huge news. This should have been on the news for like headline news, right? Deal with Palestine, deal with this. This was a big story. It's the first time since Stephen. Remember, Stephen was 18. He was a teenager when he was murdered in 1993. So it's the first time we've had this public admission, right? And Norris is refusing. He's absolutely refusing to name the other killers. So Stephen's mother, our elder Doreen Lawrence, is saying, look, we need to investigate this again. We need to do this properly. It's like he was up for what they call a parole hearing, and that's why she was here. That's why we know this. And she says, look, Norris remains a danger to the public, and he must remain in prison. And and it's likely he will remain in prison. You can see one of the newspapers decided to cover the story, and so it's sickening that he won't reveal them. But what she's also reminding us, and this is a really good point, what our elders is saying, is that the Home Office, the British Home Office, was directly involved in the unlawful surveillance of her family's campaign for justice. So we mustn't just think of this as just kind of like the actions of Norris and just a few of them. This actually was the murder. It was the harassment, the surveillance, the abuse of the family during the time, the cover-up. It goes so far. In fact, if you think about the McPherson report and the fact that it's almost been tarnished and thrown away, and you have conservative politicians who now want to talk about tripling stop and search. It's almost like they're trying to unwind and unravel and unpick all the progress that many activists I spoke about. Our elder, now ancestor, expert Kofi Nane. I spoke about the work that they did. If you watch that 3-hour video, you will see some stalwarts in our community who actually addressed issues not just to do with like global Pan-African issues, but also issues to do with things back at, in the belly of the beast. And this is the story. It's just worth remembering that Norris and Dobson are the only two who've ever been brought to justice. The 4 other suspects have never been convicted. They just lived their life like they weren't involved. And he has admitted he was there. He admitted that he was part of the attack, but he won't name the other killers. And the image I put on the screen, you can see, is if you see the one with the head at his back, when he was in his parole hearing, he did it through a video link. He refused to show his face, and so he wouldn't face a camera. So everyone had to look at the back of his head, which is why I had to find the image of his face just to remind us that it was him. This is, anyway, I'm going to move on. It's just disgusting stuff, but that's where we are. Okay, the last story for this section, this is the politics section. And perhaps it should be the good news section, but I found it quite sweet. The Tory leader, Kemi Badenoch, who supported Jenrick's nonsense about there not being a white face in Birmingham, and I can't even go through all the rubbish about that. She has claimed that the Conservative Party at this conference they just had was thrilled at her policies. They were just so thrilled to be in Manchester listening to her talking about leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, that they were going to, this is what Kemi's proposing, they're going to leave the Human Rights Convention. They're also going to establish a British version of ICE. Now, ICE, for those of you who aren't familiar, is the immigration force that's inside America that's been raiding communities and businesses across the US in search of undocumented migrants. If you're not familiar with what's happened with ICE, you need to be. It's absolutely outrageous, disgusting. So now we have a politician, someone who I'm ashamed to say, from Nigeria, who now is saying that we need a British version of that. And if we come into power, we'll do that. So if you think about the policies so far, tripling of stop and search, scrapping anti-racism plans within the police, leaving the European Convention on Human Rights, establishing a British version of ICE. There's all this reversal on climate change. I mean, it goes on and on and on and on. So she said all this mad stuff, right? Which, you know, Tories supporters will probably think, yeah, good idea. Let's do that. Let's do that. Yeah, that'll make things better. I'll be richer after that. Yeah, right. Because that's going to change my life and the cost of living, right? They're all happy to do that, right? But while she's saying all that stuff and singing Sweet Caroline in that stupid image, watch the video. You get a chance, type in Kemi Badenoch and Sweet Caroline and watch what a fool she makes of herself, trying to ingratiate her in the most humiliating ritual, singing. Watch it. And then straight after the conference, literally 5 seconds after the conference finishes, you go to a survey to ask them, so, you know, you've just come from the conference. So what do you think of your new leader? What do you think of your leader? She's been there now for a little while now. What do you think? And then, whoa, actually, we think she should go. We think we should have Robert Jenrick, actually. Yeah, I mean, yeah, she's all right. And 46% of us think she's all right. But, you know, the favourite, really, is Robert Jenrick. He's the one. You know, he's going up to Burnham and saying that there's no white faces. He's the one. He's the one who's nicking people or, you know, kind of like jumping over barriers in train stations. He's the one. And he's a man, right? You know, he's a European man. Watch it for yourself. She's gone. You've got to remember, during the local elections on May, the Tories lost more than 670 councillors. And where did they go? They went to Reform. And so she's thinking by copying Reform policies that they can reinvigorate the Conservative Party. No. It's the same thing like Labour trying to do the same thing. No. Those racists will stay with Nigel Farage. So, I mean, this is a story, just in case you didn't know the facts. Its poll happened this week. Politics from the last couple of weeks. It's a crazy, crazy time to be alive. Whew. Okay, let me drink some more. Sister Oleander.
Yeah, just one of the messages from Cosmic Jedi. One thing I finally come to learn about some of these creatures is that they thrive off disorder, stress, and disharmony. UK and USA, I'm aware all people are capable of change and transformation, but their consistent actions prove otherwise, and really makes me wonder what the end game is. Why the need to control instead of living in divine harmony with all things, all living beings?
This is a deep question. I mean, thank you for sharing that, Cosmic Jedi. That's a deep one. I mean, there's a lot to be said about that. I mean, within the last 2 weeks, I think it was Indigenous Day. I mean, they don't call it Indigenous Day. They celebrate the bandit Columbus in it, but it's Indigenous Day, Indigenous people of America, or yabba yabba, and it's important to remember that I can't believe I'm going to say this, but it's the truth. There's also a significant numbers of people in the Americas who are of European heritage, who actually don't want this madness. I mean, yesterday, there were millions of people on the streets for their, I think, what's it called? Not My King, or no, not My King, King Day protest. I forgot what they've called it. Basically, protesting the orange one. A lot of them know that they're wrong. The problem I find is that they'll go on the streets and protest, which is good. And they'll make it clear that, you know, other people, minority communities are not alone, that they have their kind of like moral support. They have their symbolic support. The problem, however, for me, is that they don't go far enough in protecting people, minoritized people, vulnerable people from their arms. They don't jettison people in their family who are wearing hoods and are members of the Ku Klux Klan. They don't tell their sons, if you join ICE, don't come back to this house because you're not welcome anymore. They don't go to that next level. And so it leaves the work of trying to live a spiritual, a balanced, a holistic life where you try to live in harmony with everyone in this kind of bizarre zone that we don't know who we can trust and we don't know how far we can trust them. It's a big discussion, and perhaps I shouldn't even try to answer it, but it's a very important comment. But I try to look at the good things as well. I try to take hope and learn from the things that are happening. that shouldn't be happening in such a toxic space, but are happening, because that always reminds us that where there's resistance, where there's power, and people, we have power. We just often forget that we have power. There's always hope, and change is always happening. And talking about that, I'm going to move to this next section, which is about world news. Just to everyone that's out there, you know the deal: YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. Use the chat. Sister Oleander's in the house. If you've got comments, please share them. Let us know. Yeah, I'm going to keep moving on because world news is bittersweet, unfortunately. So, I mean, I mentioned and invoked the name of Palestine. I haven't been well, I have talked about it, but I haven't covered the so-called peace deal, because it's not really a peace deal. It's just a ceasefire, and that's a whole program in itself, talking about the shenanigans and the misdeeds and the tricks that are being played on that. And if I start on that, we won't move over. But the one thing that has helped move things forward in many ways is the world becoming aware of the fact that children have been murdered. There's something really sinister in the fact that Westerners only pay attention when they run on this women and children. Oh, the women and children are dying, as if the value of men's lives have no value at all. So it's okay to murder all the men, so your children. But that's the world we live in right now. And what's fascinating to understand is that even though they've moved on Palestinian children, there seems to be little interest in the lives of African children. In this particular case, I'm talking about the children in Sudan, because last week a new report came out from the Raoul Wallenberg Center, and it's documenting widespread atrocities against children. And this is including killings, sexual violence, forced recruitment. I know people are unsympathetic for children who are forced to be what they call child soldiers. We talk about grooming. We seem to recognize that. We talk about the need for what was that, safeguarding. We seem to recognize that, but yet when we talk about African children, especially those living or trying to survive, I can't even say living, trying to survive in conflict zones, we seem to have this amnesia. And so it's really welcome that this investigation, you can see the paper is called "A War on Children, a World Complicit," really investigates how both the Sudanese armed forces and its enemy, the paramilitary rapid support forces, have committed widespread atrocities against children. And they've also been engaged in the destruction of essential infrastructure such as hospitals and schools. And this is not me in any way trying to diminish and distract our focus from what's happening in Palestine, what's happening in Gaza. We can do both at the same time. But it's important to remember that so much of the war that's taking place in Sudan is supported by external actors, primarily the United Arab Emirates. So there are other forces that are killing our children. No one seems to care, really. But the UAE, which is the United Arab Emirates, they're providing weapons, armored vehicles, munitions, drones, financing, political cover. They are all over this. And there's nothing. No one's. Well, I can't say no one's talking about this. All I can say that it's good that we have a report talking about this. Is a report enough? No, it's not. No, it's not. I remember earlier, it wasn't this year, it was last year, going on a protest. We walked from Parliament, we can do these protests, kind of raises the focus, but it's not enough. But we have to have a consciousness that these wars are taking place. And while we are silent on these lives, these children's lives, and vocal on other children's lives, we ourselves are communicating a message. That's why the report's called A World Complicit. We are also communicating a message that African lives or African children's lives don't really matter. And that's something we should never be communicating. Just so you know from the facts, in the first year of the conflict, more than 10 million children were exposed to violence across Sudan. That's in the first year. And this is a man-made humanitarian catastrophe. It's man-made. It's engulfed over 20 million people. If we're talking about forced displacement, we're talking about lack of food, lack of healthcare. I could go on, but check the report. It's online. You can access it. Sister Oleander.
Yes, thank you. So Afriking says, especially focusing on the community, creating our own. Oh, wait, sorry. He just put in another one, so I pressed on the second one. Sorry. Afriking says, how can Afro descendants in the UK create a movement of communal awareness of our socio-economic and political environment, taking lessons from history whilst promoting our own education? Especially focusing on the community, creating our own legal entities to cover our security and protection, as well as ability to access and acquire assets and utilities with a focus on our living standards. Wow, good questions.
It's a powerful question, and thank you for sharing that, Afriking. It's a good question. I don't have all the answers. All I will say is that we can sometimes look back to what our ancestors have done. Let's look at D'Angelo, for example. If you look at D'Angelo's catalogue of work, his body of work, there's only one song, I think, on the Vanguard album that deals with not racism, that deals with our issues. And so if you look at him, you'd think, well, hold on, here's an amazing artist with amazing talent, and he's not actually really engaging in those particular issues. And then you listen to him, or you find out he's written this song, which is uniting our people and giving money back. And you find out that sometimes you have to do the work, and you don't have to just take the glory. It's not about glory. I've always been a big advocate for the use of art in our liberation, and that means uniting artists, whatever form, whether they're singers, whether they're comedians, whatever it is that they communicate to the masses the complexities of the issues that we're facing. There's one thing that I give so much. I'm really envy. I'm not one of those Pan-Africanists who say, "Oh, you look at the Indians, they're all," or look at the Jewish people. I don't do that. Look at us. We've got work to do. I don't need to compare us to anyone else. But there's one thing that I really do recognize that that almost envious of. It's like if I look at what happened with Jimmy Kimmel in America, if I look at the passion of Jon Stewart, and I look at the late night satire network that the Americans have for pushing back against the orange one in the White House, it makes me miss the days when we had, what was the real McCoy? It makes me miss the days of when we were engaged in politics. Was it Ebony? We had the program on BBC Two when we were even using comedy, drama, whatever to educate our people, because we need to use every vehicle. I'm telling you, we have some really talented people in our community. If some of them just stopped flipping clowning around and just started making programs or songs or plays is not enough. I go to the plays, and the plays have still got that middle class kind of barrier to it, kind of mistake. I hate that. I don't want it. I started libations to our Queen, about who established Talawa Theatre, and we've still got a long way to go. Cinema's getting there slowly but surely. But we need more. We need the musicians. We need the poets. We need all of them engaged. It's like and once we do that, once we create an infrastructure which is self-sustaining because it's doing comedy, it's doing art that we love. We don't need validation from anyone else. We pay enough money to the people doing that work that they can afford to keep doing that work and they can live. Then we start to see change. Then we can find safe spaces to meet like-minded folk. But it is difficult. It is really difficult. Great question. Let me move on to the next question, the next slide. It's not all doom and gloom, because what we don't know is this particular story, for example, that Mali has imposed a visa bond on visitors from the United States who want to go there, and they've got to pay now £7,500 or $10,000 if they want a tourist or business visa. And this is something I've it's almost there. I mean, I used to say this every time, we used to travel, we go to the Caribbean and then we go to the continent. We go back and forth. And I remember saying, to Oleander and sometimes to my friends that, what, we really need to impose a tax so that the people who've got money to go to our homelands and recharge spiritually, they pay a tax, and that tax pays to subsidize those of us in the diaspora so we can go home cheap. Can you imagine being able to go to St. Lucia for like £100 for the weekend, right? Because it's subsidized by the government, because it's covered by the visas that are paid for by people who are exploiting our lands. I mean, I could put up with all the badness, all the craziness, if I could just go home and touch Ghana for 5 minutes. I could actually go to Explo's a funeral, because I need to find a couple £100. I'd rent somewhere to live, so I'll be putting money into the local economy, and I'll be back in time to hit the plantation. Right? It's like, but we can't. And so the fact that Mali has announced that it's imposing this visa, and it's the reason's not good in many ways, because essentially what happened was that the Orange One, said, right, we need to protect America's borders to safeguard US national security. So anyone from Mali wanting to come to the US has got to pay $10,000. And so Mali said, yeah, is that how you're doing it? Okay. So they decided to do exactly the same. It's wonderful. I'm not saying that there won't be problems with this in a long time. I mean, there's been tensions between US officials and Mali. They initially joined discussions in July to talk about, counter-terrorism, cooperation on economic partnerships, and of course, access to Mali's gold and lithium reserves, because that's the only reason why these Western nations want access to African countries. But ever since the coup that took place, like a couple of years ago, which has led to General Assimi Goïta taking power, and bearing in mind that he just kicked out all the French troops. There was a moment where we were leaning on Russia too hard, using Wagner, because part of the reason why the French troops were there, I'm not sure if you know, was because there was this Islamic jihadists coming in and they needed support. And so kicked out the French. The Wagner group came in, which is under Moscow's defense ministry. But now those have been replaced by Africa Corps. So essentially, we're taking care of our own business. We're protecting ourselves. We do have issues. I'm like I said, I'm not Islamophobic. Those of you who know me, my father's a Muslim, my mum Christian, but we do have issues on the continent. And part of this pushback is kind of like, and our finding our sovereignty is, how do we make this work without outside states like the United Arab Emirates trying to subvert and undermine our own sovereignty? And that's what they're doing. They're trying to change those, radicalize the young people who are already, some are Muslims, some are Christians, and trying to stir up trouble within our own camps. We don't need that. So anyway, this is a simple story, which seems like a tit for tat, but it comes from a good heart and a good place. And this is on the back of this story, which was last week, where Burkina Faso refused to take in deportees from America. And this is the same time as Washington said, you know what, we're going to stop sending visas to you. So the Foreign Affairs Minister, Karamako Jean-Marie Traoré, said, okay, if you think you can blackmail us like that, okay, you do that. Well, we're not taking in any one of your deportees, and we refuse to be complicit with your ICE system. We're not getting engaged in that. Just be very clear about that. So there is this power struggle now going on with West African nations and America, as the Orange One is trying to do that. How it's going to end, I don't know. But one thing that is good is that ever since Captain, and most people have heard that Ibrahim Traoré came to power, he has been, not just him by himself, but he, and like I said, some of the other generals have been challenging the toxic relationship and exploitative conditions imposed on Africa by Western nations. And this is a very, very good thing. It's a very, very good thing. There will be consequences, of course there will be, but we need to see this. I'll leave that there, because there are issues about coming in on a coup, and history tells us if you come in on a coup, you go out on a coup. But I am emboldened, and my heart warms when I hear these kind of these stories. It's also important to remember, just like I was talking about in America, in answer to that question by Afriking, that not every Western nation, not every European has that same Afrophobic approach towards dealing with issues. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to make it this year. I was hoping to make it down to, but there was Afro Madrid 2025 last week, and I was gutted seeing it come up on my calendar, but I was teaching, I couldn't go and support it. But I know some good people who did go. And one of the things that's happening is that Spain is taking a completely different approach to dealing with the issue of African migration. And of course, they have the same pressures like other European nations. Every nation's going to have those rednecks saying, "Oh my God, there's too many darky people in there," rah, 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 rah. But they're taking a different approach, and they're actually, rather than cutting back on development, they're trying to stay committed and help with expansion. So they're doing things like hosting the conference. That's one good start, bringing in people from all over the continent. And I'll talk about the European and African continent to discuss issues of restorative justice, the creation of a new development fund, all these kind of things. They've launched a new advisory council. What else are they doing? They want to build embassies, in African nations in partnership, so that they can actually support business and education. This is not a colonial plan, from what I can see. They've also pushed back on some of the rulings that have come in support of the Zionists in Israel attacking Gaza. So there's a level of consistency that's making me feel good. So again, things are changing, and we have to be receptive to the idea of recognizing that we're going to find allies in strange places. I never pictured Spain as a natural ally. Never. I mean, I'm just being honest. Okay, the last story for this section. You heard about this one today. Really nice story. And it falls into the next section, which is our being positive space. But this one is really Ghana's foreign minister has done a deal to enable Ghanaian nurses to actually work in Grenada. And I know it sounds, kind of, well, isn't that happening already? No, not really. And what's happening is that there are thousands of Ghanaian nurses who are finding themselves jobless. The labour market is struggling. We know there's lots of different problems with people moving around the world, etc. Ghana's health sector has faced an employment bottleneck. And so you're having qualified staff, experts, they've done and completed mandatory training. They've even taken to the streets in protest because they're looking for job placements and opportunities. And the international opportunities that we'd normally have been pushed back against because of the racism that's going across Europe. And so what's happening is that you're seeing African Caribbean nations saying, well, while those idiots are blaming us for what their politicians are doing, why don't we just help each other? And I think this is a beautiful story. So that's the last one I'm going to talk about on world news. And then we're going to go into the last section of the day, which is being positive. Whew, okay, I'm going to do that same thing and take a quick sip. And remind you that you're watching Igali's Pan-African Community News Update. And this is the last section of the program. So if you've got something you want to say, this is the time you should say. I'm in the studio with Sister Oleander. If you're watching live, chat as everyone's been doing. Thank you for being with us on this journey. It's been really, really heartwarming. Your comments kind of like feed the spiritual energy. I think this is, oh my gosh, we've gone into the second hour. I didn't want to go into 2 hours. We try to do it in under 90 minutes. So we're almost there. But as ever, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share if you find this useful. So let me move on. Okay, so the first story is one of this new film, Cornwallis Cloth, which explores the African Caribbean civilians who built and worked on the bases in the United Kingdom during World War II. Now, they've received little recognition in the UK, and this is a short film. It's going to be screened at the Old Royal Naval College in London, and it's just going to talk about this and just kind of like remind us that when people say that we are not stakeholders, that we don't belong here, kind of like there was a tweet I received or something about it was a ridiculous thing on social media where there was a newspaper had complained about diversity inside TV advertising and in the casting, and saying that there's a disproportionate numbers of people from minoritized communities in these programs. What's going on, and in bad adverts, what's going on? They're all complaining about this, right? These kind of programs remind, or these kind of short films help remind people kind of like why Britain owes us, and it does owe us. The cast includes Jennifer Marjorie Robinson, bringing the era to life. It's going to be accompanied by an exhibition which explores the themes and historical background of the stories that it covers. The installation is built on 30 years of investigative research. It includes testimonies and diaries from elders from the Caribbean, veterans in the East End, merchant seamen, American airmen, and German U-boat crews. It's I mean, I haven't seen it yet. If I get a chance to get down there, I look forward to seeing it. It was co-directed and produced by Tony Thompson with Rebecca Goldstone, who are the co-founders of Sweet Potato Arts. And he said that thousands of workers from across the Caribbean were recruited to build all these air and naval bases in record time. They went wherever they were needed: Bermuda, St. Lucia, Antigua, Trinidad, and they did the heavy lifting and groundwork, putting up hangars and a lot of outbuildings and laying roads. I mean, we know they did far more than just that. That's just helping with the war effort to push back against Nazism. But if we start talking about the building of the infrastructure of the UK, the NHS, we'd be here all day. So that's one screening that's taking place, one story. The next, I want to give thanks to my colleague Lewis for telling me about this. He, this time last week, he sent me a message, but I was so stuck into work, I just couldn't go. That he'd been this amazing exhibition at the Tate Modern about Nigerian modernism. It's set against a backdrop of cultural and artistic rebellion. It celebrates the achievements of Nigerian artists working before and after the decade of national independence from British colonial rule, which took place in 1960. And it tells the story of many artistic networks which spanned Zaria, Ibadan, Lagos, Enugu, as well as London, Munich, and Paris. I can't wait to go. I think it's running for at least a month. Don't hold me to that, but I know there's a little bit of time to go. But I've heard it's amazing. There's a diverse range of paintings, sculptures, poetry from around 50 different artists. So if you are interested in art, especially those that emerges in the backdrop of rebellion or pushing back against colonial rule, this sounds like something that would be amazing to check out. I'm planning to go there. I'm going to take my son and just geek out. Hi, Shala. Okay. Next story. Talking about history. There's one of my favorite films, one of the films that conscientized me, one of the most important films I ever saw, documentaries, was by Baba John Henrik Clarke, and it was called A Great and Mighty Walk. And this is when I was just new. I was a musician, bunging around the world, kind of like playing gigs, had no idea about being involved in politics. I just wanted to make music and have fun. And I slowly learned that might have been what I wanted to do, be an artist, but the world wanted something different from me. And the ancestors said, no, Toyin, no. You've had your little fun, a decade of bumming around making music. Now you're going to get to work. And I saw Great and Mighty Walk, this documentary, and it was amazing. It was a masterclass. It was African history in 2 hours. I mean, I recommend it to everyone. I think you can even watch it on YouTube. And one of the stories that came out of that was the existence of Timbuktu. I was just like everyone else in the West, in the diaspora, socialized to believe that African history was kind of like we didn't have educational systems, no institutions. Obviously, I know much more now. We didn't have political system. I mean, it was madness. And then you learn about spaces like, the Njari Beer Mosque in the heart of Timbuktu, which has been running or sitting for 700 years. And what we don't know is that there's an annual tradition that's taken place every single year since it's been built, and that was 1325 by Emperor Mansa Musa. Now, and they kind of like what they do? What's that word? Restore it, strengthen it. They make sure that they honor it. Remember, it's built from Bangkok, which is a sun-dried earth material. It's one of the oldest earthen buildings in continuous use in Africa. And it's so unique. It's so marvelous. It secured UNESCO World Heritage status in 1989. So this year, marks its 700th anniversary. 700th. How many times do you hear someone celebrating the 700th anniversary? This is a structure of African people. When people say that African people never built anything, never did anything, or nothing we did has value or whatever, you need to check this out. I'm not saying there's not problems. I spoke in this program earlier about some of the Islamist jihadists who are trying to cause problems between African people of different spiritual systems and belief systems. And it's also a threatened institution. There are people trying to cause damage. But right now, let's reflect on the celebration that takes place every year. And it's a wonderful one. And the president of the Timbuktu Regional Council says that it's a cultural and social celebration where everyone participates, women, youth, elders. It's also a way to teach the next generation. So it's a simple story, but I think it's an important story. And us to remember that this is just one of many great accomplishments that we have and that we should be proud in. The next story is one about, I've lived in London all my life, that there's a space called Peckham Palms, right? You probably heard Peckham, Little Lagos, right? Well, apparently since 2019, there's been a space called Peckham Palms. It's been the first dedicated hair and beauty space, which is purposely designed for African hair. And it's been running 6 years later. It's still thriving. It's expanded to house a range of startups, including a restaurant, a fashion label, an author studio, like I said, a coffee shop. And you can see some of the images of some of the vendors there. And the directors of the space, they pride themselves on being socially responsible. Yes, they're landlords, but they offer subsidized rent. And this is vital for the stylists who previously operated in that region. You see, for many of them, this has been their first chance, sometimes their only opportunity to have a space to, I don't know if you know, some people rent saloon chairs, and then they go from renting a chair, building a clientele list, to having a full salon unit of their own. So I just want to big it up, right? It's a small win. It's a big win. It's an important win. And and that's, again, I said good news. It's good news. We have to remember these things and honor it. And thank those involved in this work. The next story is one that Grenada has unveiled a monument to Louise Helen Norton Little. Now, if that surname Little rings a bell, it's because, of course, you may, and the big image is a bit of a clue, remember that she birthed a young boy who went by the name of Malcolm Little. And then he moved to Detroit Red. And then he moved and became Malcolm Omowale X. And then finally, Manikel Shabazz. And we talk about Malcolm. We talk about his accomplishments. We draw upon his wisdom, his strength, and his teachings, even to this very day. And this is not just a Pan-African legend. His words and his teachings inspire people all over the world. But often what we don't do is reflect on his mother, Louise, our ancestor. And she was, in herself, she wasn't just like a genetic contribution to him in this world. She was a brilliant intellectual and a grassroots activist who served as the secretary of Marcus Garvey's UNIA, that's the United Negro Improvement Association. Now, Garvey's teaching of self-determination and Pan-Africanism shaped how she raised her children. And this, in turn, influenced Malcolm's political outlook. Now, of course, I'm not saying that Malcolm didn't have any agency. And we saw that as he, went through his teenage phase. He went, and the influence of American society and capitalism meant that he had a spelling, incarcerated. But he grew and he developed, as we all do. And he became that great China he is. But we also had to big up Louise Helen Norton Little. We often write out the contributions of the famous and the tireless work of the amazing sisters in our community. So it's good to know that this tribute was held in May. Again, we might be a few months late, but we're talking about it now, with what would have been her son's 100th birthday. It was organized by the Institute of the Black World 21st Century and the Malcolm X Family Foundation, and it was attended by a distinguished international delegation. And I thank them for doing this work. I thank them for making sure that we don't just parrot the patriarchal tropes that write women out of our liberation struggles. We remember. And this is a good story. I spoke about Sudan, and it was unfortunately it was a sad narrative, but let's remember the positive narrative, and not to art wash it, but just to be contextualize it. And there's going to be an exhibition. It's going to exhibit the bronze figurehead of the goddess. It's one of the highlights. It's called well, I don't know if it's called, but it's featuring Sudan's ancient kingdom of the Kush. It's going to take place in Stirling, which is in Scotland. It's one of the first time that the British Museum has released, I say released, they say loaned, released these artifacts. And so, the people in Scotland from the 23rd of October will be able to see some of these amazing pieces of art and work. It's going to run until the 22nd of February next year. I hope I'm able to jump on a train and get to see it. It'll be nice to see it in a context that isn't the British Museum. But if you're up there, wherever you're watching, check it out. The project curator, Dr. Loretta Kilroy from the British Museum, said, look, Sudan has a fascinating history and a rich cultural heritage that is often overlooked. With the ongoing conflict in the region, it is vital that this heritage is protected. And that's so true. I work with an amazing young sister, Pan-Africanist at UCO, Jaila. She, also works with Saita, who runs projects at UCL's Sudan Museum, which is the largest collection of Sudan artifacts in the UK. And there are Sudanese communities and artists and activists and scholars who are trying to remind everyone that Sudan is not just doom and gloom. It has a heritage that we must protect, that we must remember. There are, we have to, we cannot let them die. We cannot just turn a blind eye to this. We can, what's that saying? We can walk and chew gum at the same time. This is another issue. And having these kind of exhibitions remind us of that. We shouldn't need an exhibition to do that, but it is an excuse to remind us. Sister Oleander. Okay, we're almost at the end.
Yeah, there's some comments. I just want to read through. I'm going to just take this one here. All Afro people globally should unionize their living standards in every country we inhabit, because governments work for us. So if our standards drop, we should all strike at the same time.
Yeah, that's a powerful one. One of the problems is that perhaps sometimes we have to find another word rather than unionize. Not because I don't believe in unions. I'm a member of a union. But sometimes it come under the Western paradigm. And in the UK, for example, unions have to vote to strike. And then they have to have a ridiculously high threshold before the strike is legal. And they get tied up in knots, like how many people participated. You need more people to vote for striking in a union than you need to vote a gang of like gangsters in political parties to govern the country. So sometimes you're right, we do need to unionize. And perhaps the term is always just we just need to unite, but we do need a form of organized unity so that we can call a national boycott and mean it. But that's part of the work that we're all involved in. Great comment, though, and great point to make.
Okay, and then Natalie, greetings, Natalie. She says this channel is forever useful.
Oh, thank you. No,
and Cosmic Jedi says agreed, which is lovely. And Natalie then goes on to say, as an African, we are the black print for everything.
I love it. Yeah.
And then African says capitalism within the Afro-Black bourgeoisie is why we as a people don't have the social cohesion to focus and tackle our problems, which is why we should unionize our living standards. Please talk on this.
No, you're right. I mean, those of you who know I'm an anti-capitalist. It's an issue, but we are inside the capitalist system, and we're in a capitalized system that has nuclear weapons and is armed and it's shown itself willing to use it against us. And we also we have a community that can't even imagine living outside a capitalist framework. And until we have done that work, and as artists, as educators, as scholars, as just as a family, to show that we are more than some dollar value, some pound dollar. Until we can do that, we've got to find hybrid ways of surviving. And so, I mean, I gave you an example of that group that was in Peckham, and and they're doing their best to be ethical landlords. And I mean, I hate the term landlord, but they are doing their best. And in an ideal world, that wouldn't be needed, but it is, right? Because those individuals who are taking those cheers and starting off their own businesses to survive, that's an opportunity they wouldn't have otherwise, or else they end up being the labor force for the gendered lantry, for the bourgeoisie. I'm not pretending that we don't have a bourgeoisie class here, and and I can tell some horrific stories of what's taking place in Atlanta, the good side of it and the bad side of it. But we do need to have these discussions, and I thank you for raising that point.
Okay, so the next point is African as a Gen Z Afro diaspora, we are all tired of the political institutions stifling the progress and directly not address the justice through Ma'at. We deserve for the crimes against the ancestors and us.
That sounds like half a sentence. And us too.
And us. Well, I think he's saying
the crimes against ancestors and us,
and
us now. Right, got it. No, you're right. We do, but that's not gifted to us. That's something we have to do the work for. And I think that's part of the challenge, right? We have to do that work. We can't expect someone else to do that work for us. And that is
who would be best placed to do it if not us?
Yeah, but there's a term I use called survival fatigue, and this is the challenge when you live in a diaspora. So outside, people think that everything is going swimming, that we live the streets are paved with gold. But when you're in a diaspora and you're in a Western nation, you know how difficult, how much work, extra work you have to do just to survive. I mean, this program alone, which should have been able to be wrapped up in an hour, this is only 2 weeks worth of news. And we are now running for 2.5 hours. That's insane. Okay, that's mad. And I'm having to do this labor uncosted. There's no funding for this. The only funding we get is from our community. It's from us giving our time and volunteering. So there's a bigger political education program that we need to do. And that's the one thing. It's the reason why the Black Panther movement was one of my favorite all-time movements, because they understood that the mission wasn't just about looking cool with berets and rifles. It was also about education programs. It was also about breakfast clubs. It was also, I'm not going to pretend for one moment that the movement went far enough dealing with misogyny, with homophobia. The way it treated James Baldwin was out of order. But it's still my favorite movement because it got some of the things right. Many of the leadership were trained by the military of the United Snakes of America. They learned those techniques and they donated that expertise back to the community. And that's what we need to do. We need to learn how to survive inside a capitalist system that is armed and that's willing to murder us, and then use those skills and train the next generation how to defend themselves from it. And we need to do that unapologetically. And that sort of work we can't do on YouTube. I can't do it on Twitter. I can't do it on Facebook. Those kind of things we had to do. We had to learn from our elders like Eric Huntley. We had to learn from our Walter Rodneys. We had to learn from Yara Santig, and we had to do them in our homes, in our spaces, with the men, with the women, with the children. We had to watch The Spook Who Sat by the Door and listen to Margaret Busby about publishing. We have to. There's so much work.
Yeah.
So I can hear myself lecturing. I'm a lecturer.
So we need to move on now.
Okay.
So the next comment is from
There
Emma.
are more comments.
That's why I'm trying to get through them. I didn't know about UCL's Sudan Museum. Is it open to the public?
Yes, it is. It's called the Petrie Museum, and we're going to change the name because Petrie was a eugenicist, and so the name there's a campaign inside UCL. Of course, I'm involved in it. We're trying to get rid of it, but there's also a very influential supporters and friends and family of the Petrie Museum who are fighting us to change the name. But we will change the name, and it'll take time. It might take a few years. but it is the largest collection of Sudanese and Egyptian artifacts. And yeah, you can walk in. I mean, if you just go in and say I'm looking to the museum, they often have exhibitions on. There's actually also a Pan-Africanist group. I know it's normally it's largely, I should say, for UCL students and scholars, but I know some of the events have been open to the public. So this is why I miss not having a newsletter. Perhaps we need to bring, that's more work. Yeah, yeah, there is. I don't know how to share that information though. I'll look into it. I'll have something by the time we come back next week in 2 weeks' time.
Okay, so the next comments are just agreeing, but there is one before we finish. Are you on the last one now?
We have around 4 more slides.
Okay, I'll let you finish those, and then I'll just read them.
No worries. Okay, so let me move to the next slide, and again, more. Did that work? More good news. Okay, so those of you who know, I mean, if I wasn't married, I have a crush on Mia Mottley. She's an amazing Prime Minister of Barbados, putting her money where her mouth is, kind of like walking the talk, and she's done something again, which is just so simple but just so beautiful. Barbados has joined Belize, Dominica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and they now have the free movement of nationals amongst the CARICOM states. And this is such a simple thing, but it's a landmark step. This is the sort of thing that should have happened. This is right, regional integration, right? And she's saying that Barbados will open our doors with order and with pride. And this is, again, this is us helping ourselves. So Fortress Europe is erecting all these barriers and borders, and that's the problem, right? They're sucking our labor. They're hurting us, securitizing us. They're surveillance technologies, all the kind of things that they're doing. But we don't need to carry on with that. We need to actually trust each other. And so this is actually, like I say, it's a very simple story, but it's a good story. Next one is, again, very simple. It's reminding us of our worth. The kente cloth, which is a symbol of Ghanaian culture in many ways that we know, it's now been given protector status. Now, I don't know all the ins and outs of how this protector status works, but what I do know is that it authenticates kente, and it protects it under Ghanaian international and intellectual property law. So it can't be exploited. That's what I'm hearing. I had to learn more about this. But there's only a few other clothes that have been protected in this way, or material being protected in this way. But I mean, again, I haven't had a chance to research into, kind of like what this means to its fullest degree, and who's doing authentication, and what are the punitive measures, and does it inhibit creativity? Does it harm kind of like local people? I doubt it. But these are things where we're saying that something that is ours, that comes from our community, has worth and has value. We shouldn't have to say that. We know it has worth and has values. But sometimes we seem to need reassurance. We need validation. So this is good. This is, it's very nice that now only certain areas that are made with, it's only, so let's be precise, only clothing that's made with certain traditional methods within certain regions, and this includes the centers of Bonwire, Akotame Kapote, and Sakura Wunu, may be sold and marketed as kente. My pronunciation is awful. Apologies for that. For any Ghanaians out there thinking, "Oh, Toyin, man, your anglicized English is awful," but this is a good news story. Well, I hope it's a good news story. Okay, Monday I went to this UK reparations. Well, I didn't go to the conference. I went to the reparations event, which took place in the same venue, a Euston house, or friend's house in Euston. It's opposite UCL where I am. I didn't know there was actually an event on yesterday, which is So I'm a bit confused about that. So if someone went, it'd be great to, well, we haven't got enough time, it'd be great to know how it went, etc. It just means my radar is completely off kilter. But this is the third annual UK Reparations Conference. The photograph I have is the one that I went on Monday. And that was really pretty cool. I mean, you know, the many Kind Andrews, Gary Young. Gary Young's keynote was particularly brilliant. I hope he publishes it. It was something that, you know, I think that young scholars and young people should hear. You know, he always delivers in this powerful way. But it was, you know, it was a nice event. I didn't stay for the whole event. It was during the day, and if there was an event yesterday, which this flyer and the website seems to say so, it'll be good to know. But the point I'm trying to make is that, and you can see that from the banner at the bottom of the screen, which was on the African Union's website, that 2025 has been seen as a year of reparations. I don't think that it should stop at the end of the year. Of course not, it should continue. But the fact that we do have an all-party parliamentary group for African reparations, the fact that it's continued this annual event, and it looks like Friends House is there pushing it, you know, hosting it, which is a good thing. I'm hoping they're hosting it for free. That's another issue as well, because that'll be an act of reparations. It's a cool thing. I mean, I'm going to close with a quote by one of the lead MPs who are supporting this, which is Belle Riviere Ade, and she's chair of the all-party parliamentary group. She said, "So many of the problems we face today have their roots in the enslavement and colonization of Africa, from racism to economic inequality and unequal impact of climate change. Like other European states, our country has a moral duty to share this history, to steer this history in the face and address its role in these historic injustices." And so, you know, she's got it bang on. And like, you know, with people like Sister Esther Stanford or Akua, like I still can't believe he's gone. I mean, we have so many people who have been on this charge, who have been focused on this. It's good to see that the baton hasn't dropped. There are some issues about representation and of leadership that we will have to discuss at some stage, of a hijacking of the agenda, all those kind of things that come with any movement like this. But the good news is that we're still on it, and I want to take that, and that's why I see it as a positive news story. But if anyone who went yesterday, if you're with us next week, please give some feedback about how it went, because I completely missed it. I'm normally on top of all these kind of things. And oh gosh, okay, this is actually almost like an apology. This is the penultimate slide. It's a call out. This is probably the closest thing I have to an advert, and you know, it is what it says: please support our artists, healers, activists, and educators. And I put this here because, you know, I for many years I've been working with artists in our community. I've been working with educators, and one of the most amazing collective artists I work with it was a trio: our brother Ken McCullough, Jennifer Lewis, and Kofi Alvin. And you know, they came together, and they have done some amazing work in our community, sometimes unsung: fine art, cards, illustrations, books, everything. And you know, I think we had to talk about the loss of Jennifer when she was murdered, when she returned home. You know, it's these things weigh heavy because they're people that are friends and that you know and stuff. And I every year, myself and Oleander, we make it over to Ken's Opens house every single year without fail, even if we end up like the last 5 minutes and it extends to another hour or so. And he's always got a new collection of amazing work. And I learned something, and it's the people that are there as well. We always sit down with a reason, and you know, I remember his music taste is amazing. So you know, Effie, his jazz knowledge of jazz is superb. And I pick up tracks from my soundtrack from him and stuff like that. And he extended his open day, because if you see the dates, it closed Saturday 11th of June, you know, to June the 12th, and that was last week. And he extended it till yesterday and today. And I couldn't go today because I just flat out work. And you know, and somewhere in my head I thought, you know what, Toyin, you must be able to go. Today was the last day. He starts at 11, he finishes at 6. You know what I mean? Do this, get down there. And then, you know, kind of like just spend a couple of hours and come back here and do the program. And I still couldn't do it. It's the first year that I haven't made that ritual, and it hurts. And so I'm just, you know, sorry, brother Ken. I know you probably don't even know I'm saying this. we appreciate you, we value you. I want the community to know that we have to support our artists, because with this AI technology, it's not just people who do like visual arts, like drawing, but we're seeing virtual actors. We're seeing books written by this technology. We're seeing, what that Spotify had, this band, this made up band, #1 on the Spotify list, wasn't even human, right? We have to support our artists. We have to support our healers. We have to support our activists and educators, okay? Because if we don't, well, I don't even want to go there. So that was it. That's the last story. Sister Oleander, I think you wanted to say something before I wrap up with the last slide.
Yeah, so it's just Cosmic Jedi just giving you some information in regard to music. In the background, you can use YouTube free tracks on repeat. And he says also, depending on the app you use to stream, he uses whatever that says, and it allows you to stream multiple sounds at once with control of the output volumes as well.
Thank you for that. I might look into that. We used to edit some songs, like I don't know if you remember Fertile Ground. There's they have some beautiful tunes we use for our libations. We use Amal Jamal, and so some of those tunes are copyright. And so I don't know how it works. I'd rather give them exposure, but I don't know if that will block people accessing stuff. But I would look into those technological suggestions. We use a platform called StreamYard. I don't have to. It just makes it easy when we're not kind of like broadcasting from home. But I appreciate that, because it would be nice to have some music back on the program again. But just even putting the slides together and the research takes up a long time.
There's a few more comments, but I think we can read those offline because it is 8:32.
Well, oh gosh, right. Okay, this might have been the longest program in a long time. Okay. Well, look, Sister Oleander, thank you for being here with us. And it's good having you as wing person.
You're welcome.
I also, as usual, want to give thanks to Sister Angie, Brother Colin, Sister Amma for the research. Couldn't have done this without you. For our community journalists, there's many of you out there. Melissa Sagoda, the Source, Nadine White, Sinai Flaherty. There's advocates on social media, Dr. Shola Mas Shokabayamu. There's so many of you out there who are contributing to the stories that I'm learning and growing from. Wow. We're back in 2 weeks' time. I didn't write down a date. I think that's the 2nd of November. I might need to check the calendar now while I'm here.
It is the 2nd.
That's the 2nd of November, 6 p.m. I hope the 6 p.m. is working for everyone. I don't know what else to say, really. The usual, what's it? Don't agonize, organize. It's not my quote. Many people have said that. Don't forget to join and support a collective if you can, Pan-African organization. If you can't do that, teach amongst your family, amongst your friends. Wow, what else can I say? My voice is almost gone. It's been a pleasure having you with us. I'm going to try and not make the program last so long in 2 weeks' time. I can't sustain this, but there was a lot of news over the last fortnight, and I hope you think it was worth us going through it. And the libation section of the program is crucial. That's who we are.
Absolutely. Sorry, Brother Howard's just asking any way to donate.
Give thanks. There are, but right now, one of the things that's outstanding is the need to redo our website. And once the website's redone, that will become easier for the donations. There is a link, but it's harder to find, to point out to. The key thing to donate right now is your time. So if you can spread the word, if you have anything you can help to contribute with what we're doing, that's cool. That's it right now. But thank you, and I love for asking the question. I really appreciate that. Sister Oleander, anything else? Or
no, I'm just responding. That's
okay.
fine.
With that, it says we've been live for 2
Yeah.
hours, 29,
And
29 minutes.
it's been lovely spending time with you all, but now I think it's time for everybody, including yourselves, to get some rest. It's been quite a heavy hitting show this time. So, yeah, I just want to say, give thanks for joining us, whether you're seeing us live or you're joining via one of the social media platforms in the future sometime. But do please spread our news, and hopefully we will see you again in 2 weeks' time. And yeah, love, one love.
Give thanks. And I'm going to close off as ever, just like a thank you for being with us, as Sister Oleander said. Be good, be safe. You know, the world right now is a dangerous place. Be mindful, watch your back, have love, support others. And as ever, may the ancestors continue to guide and protect us. Ashe.
Ashe.